They could hardly believe it. The boulder had actually killed the great white shark, but their joy lasted less than 3 seconds before panic set in again. There were still a few ferocious great white sharks in the water, ready to attack at any moment, and there were no more loose boulders on the cliff above. On this tiny island, barely 10 square meters in size, and with no place to stand, how would the two women trapped on the raft escape? Just a few hours earlier, they had been flying with a group of friends on a seaplane, heading to a small island for a vacation. One of the survivors surfaced first, anxiously scanning the area for any sign of friends. To their horror, a massive shark slowly swam past. Too terrified to make a sound, they remained still. Fortunately, the shark had no interest and soon disappeared below the surface. Then another survivor appeared, followed by their boyfriend. They were lucky to have survived, but three others, including the pilot, were still unaccounted for. Suddenly, they noticed something. Swimming over, they found the pilot barely alive. Just as they were about to ask if there was any hope of rescue, the pilot lost consciousness due to his severe injuries. Luckily, an inflatable life raft was found, and they quickly went to help. But they hadn't noticed a shark rapidly closing in. In an instant, it dragged the pilot away. By the time they managed to climb into the raft, the pilot was gone. It was then that one of them spotted a small island in the... But as they were about to swim toward the island, three sharks suddenly appeared, heading straight for them. The ferocious great whites attacked, tearing into the swimmer. The remaining survivor, terrified, turned to swim toward the raft, but the sharks were closing in fast. Just as it seemed like all hope was lost, an idea struck. Instead of swimming away, they grabbed onto a floating object. Confused, their companion urged them to move faster. Just as it looked like the sharks had devoured them, they resurfaced safely on the other side. Barely catching their breath, another shark suddenly charged at the raft, instantly throwing them into the sea. Quickly handing over a dagger, they positioned themselves back to back, ready to defend against the next attack. But in the next second, one of them was dragged underwater. Flewa. Turning around, their companion watched helplessly as the shark tore them apart. Left alone, the survivor swam back to the raft. But the sharks weren't done. They continued circling, watching closely. Knowing survival wouldn't last much longer, the lone survivor paddled desperately toward the island. Just then, another body was spotted floating nearby. Swimming over to check, there was no response. Pulling the body aboard, it became clear that the lower half was missing. Another victim of the sharks. Before there was even time to mourn, the vicious sharks reappeared, snatching the body away. With strength fading, the survivor barely made it to the raft and quickly opened the supply box. Inside was food, water, and surprisingly, a walkie-talkie. Desperately, they called for help, but there was no response. Then they found a flare gun. Without hesitation, they fired it into the sky, praying that someone would see it. As they waited anxiously, another survivor appeared, drifting toward the island. Miraculously, they had only suffered a minor leg injury. Just as a rope was thrown to pull them aboard, the sharks reappeared. Luckily, they narrowly avoided another attack. Overwhelmed with grief upon learning that everyone else had perished, they tried to stay strong. Then, suddenly, a voice came through the walkie-talkie, Sifruching, Fussing. A speedboat soon arrived, but the rescuers, unaware of the lurking danger, hesitated upon seeing the sharks. As they stood guard with spear guns, disaster struck. A shark suddenly rammed the speedboat, knocking one of them into the water. Before the other could react, a shark leaped out, biting off an arm, sending them both into the ocean. Within moments, they too were devoured. Watching their last hope of rescue vanish, the two survivors knew they couldn't just wait for death. A plan was needed. On the cliff above, a large rock teetered on the edge. If they could tie a rope around it and lure the sharks below, they might be able to crush them. But despite making noise, the clever sharks refused to take the bait. With no other choice, one of them decided to be the bait. Jumping into the water, the plan worked. The sharks swam toward them. Just in time, they scrambled back onto the raft, while their companion pulled the rock down. With perfect timing, they crushed one shark. But the relief was short-lived. Two more sharks remained, and there were no more loose rocks. Then they noticed the spear guns from the fallen rescuers drifting nearby. To retrieve them, they soaked rocks in their wounds' blood and tossed them into the water to distract the sharks. Once the sharks were momentarily preoccupied, one of them dove into the water, grabbing the spear gun. But the sharks weren't fooled for long. As one turned back toward them, they swam desperately, just barely escaping in time. Unfortunately, the injuries were too severe. Despite efforts to stop the bleeding, one survivor succumbed to blood loss. Filled with rage, the last survivor was now determined to fight back. Using gasoline from the supply box, a trap was set. A rope was tied to the box, connected to the spear gun. As the shark lunged again, the spear gun was fired, hitting the shark's mouth. Pouring gasoline around it, the survivor grabbed the flare gun and fired. Flames engulfed the shark, and after a brief struggle, it was finally dead. Just as victory seemed assured, the last shark suddenly lunged, dragging the body of the fallen companion beneath the surface. Realizing this was the best chance to escape, the survivor dove into the water, swimming toward the speedboat. But before reaching it, the shark was right on their tail. Just barely avoiding another attack, the survivor climbed aboard. With the shark ramming the speedboat, a final plan was needed. A final plan was needed. Spotting an oxygen tank, they quickly taped a knife to it. As the shark launched another assault, they waited for the right moment. When it came, the last desperate move worked. The final shark was finally eliminated. Exhilarated and exhausted, the survivor couldn't believe they had made it. Just then, a rescue boat arrived. The nightmare was finally over.